think it is being recorded.
Yes. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Namaste. Harvard Hindu Alumni welcomes you to the part 3 of the Decoding Ancient Temples. Just for your information, this session is being recorded. It is 11:09 a.m. here in New York, so let's get started. I give the mic to our chairperson, Kanchan, who will take it further.
Thank you so much, Chandan. Before proceeding, I would like to say namaste to all and a very big thank you to Chandan and Subhashish because you guys have really put on up so much of efforts bringing each and every bit of knowledge here. Chandan, thank you for arranging and organizing and being a man who holds us all together. And Subhashish, thank you for sharing your intense work and knowledge, which you have created so far. We are really looking forward for this session. Without taking too much of time, let's switch to Subhashish for this energy-filled and information-filled session.
Done. Absolutely. So let me first ensure that you folks are seeing my actual screen, right? Let me see. Are you guys seeing an entire screen?
Yeah.
Okay. So why don't I get started? So this is the part 3 of Decoding Temples. One of the key elements of what I've achieved over the last 3-4 months from the last one is that I used AI heavily to decode many of the temples. And the thing is that there's always an intuitive element in decoding temples, but once you put data into an AI system and model it out, it just gives you tremendous confidence. So I've used Julius AI rigorously to take orbital data, kinematic data, quantum physics data, and I've layered it to create a lot of visualization. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go directly into the presentations, and this presentation is really about the quantum physics behind the temple code. So for example, if you want to really understand like what we are going to present at the end of the session or what we're going to learn, it is really about that temples were astrolabs of the ancient world. Now, there's a lot of stuff over here which is a little mind-boggling. Like, why were they doing it? Well, they were measuring the hologram. Hologram? Yeah. We live in a pixelated reality, which we'll talk about. And they mastered what is called the electromagnetics of the entire realm. What they really did is that they understood some of the realities that we are not privy to, that the stars and all that, they render the hologram. The planets and the planetary waves, um, specifically the sun-moon system, they create our psyche and our emotions. And ultimately, our DNA does what is called quantum entanglement because it acts as a digital fractal antenna. Now, these are not my words. I'll show you evidence. Okay. But for the time being, too much of buzzwords. Just hold on for some time. If you look at some of these temples, right? This is the Kailash temple. Just crazy engineering. Now I'm going to show you some pictures, and it is mind-boggling. Why would they even build something like this? Second point is, it looks like art. It is, but it's really a code. So for the last 4 years, or maybe 5 years, I've been trying to decode many of the temples. And I believe that I've succeeded in understanding what some of these temples were designed for. But to understand why they were designed, we have to be in the brains of the ancients who built all this, because you can't, these temples are inimitable, which means you can't really reproduce this. So the caveat that I have to tell you is that when you have to decode temples, you need to really know a lot of these subjects, and it is so hard for people to understand these subjects like math, astronomy, archaeology, geometry, philosophy, I mean, whatnot, right? And that has been my entire focus. So let's go and understand the Kailash temple a little bit and the quantum physics that they are talking about. So first of all, when you look at this, the only way to decode this is to ask questions. Think of it. The whole thing is made from one whole block of stone. Did they start in the bottom? Did they go from top to bottom or bottom to top? It's hard to even understand how they did it. Now, if you really look at the stone, it's basalt. Where are the tools? There are no tools found. But forget that. People talk about like, okay, you can dig up and then you can, there's going to be a lot of debris. How would you even transport the debris when the whole thing is a locked system? So there's so many questions and we don't have answers. We'll probably never have answers at the way we think. So we've got to change our thinking. But long story short, if you take a point of view of the astronomical lab, which is this temple, you've got to look at it from a point of view of how they visualize the sun, moon, stars, and these energies. Why? We'll come to that in a moment. Basically, these people were quantum physicists, but they knew the real quantum physics of the universe, not the spooky ones that people talk about, which is not science, but just a religion. So what they did is simply that the observatory managed to look at each and every star around the celestial sphere. And what I mean to say is that this particular temple or observatory focused on one very important star, and it is called Regulus. We'll talk about Regulus in a bit. But the first thing is, let's talk about the finishing inconsistencies which are there in the temple. So which means that the way to decode the temple is to first look at the temple and then suddenly find something that is not very consistent. Let me give you an example. On the left, you can see the engraved material as if like it is laser etched. How that has been done, I have no idea. But on the other hand, on the on the right side, you can see the stone polishes. It's a stone polished, 3D stuff which has been etched on, not etched, kind of etched on the wall, but it's polished. Let's look at some other stuff. You can see over here on the left, it is stone polishing. On the right, it is detailed engraving. Let me give you another example. On the top, you can see, like, again, it's the same thing. The elephant at the bottom is detailed and lifelike. Like, amazing. On the top, it's just like, nothing compared to what is shown at the bottom, the bottom elephant. The point that I want to tell you is that these temples are probably 100,000, 200,000, 300,000, even 1,000,000 years old. And then later, another civilization came in and they changed the entire model, which you'll see later. Sorry for that. But the most interesting piece is decoding these temples takes a lot of time and extreme understanding of the universe and quantum physics. Now, take a look at these pictures of what is called the Shikara, or, the top of the dome. Look at the intricate art and technology being used to just model it. The question is, how did they do this? We will never know. Perhaps I will not. But it's an enigma. So long story short, you got an idea, like, what the temples were used for, but now we're going to go in a very detailed way. So the question is, what's the purpose of these temples? Why would they build it? Well, they knew the ultimate reality, which is we live in a hologram, and the stars and the planets, they create this holographic reality. Why did they measure these stars and planets and all that? Because they were simply energies, and which we'll show you, They're basically quantum physics, electromagnetic fields that basically create a rhythm in this reality. And they also ensured that they understood how people are being born, when are they getting born, and all that stuff, because that changes the holographic fields. They were very focused on a technology, a new model called implosive physics. If you look at how our civilization runs, it runs on explosive physics, which is you burn something, it creates an explosion, then you harness the energy. They did not do all that. They basically created what is called implosive physics, or what we know is black hole physics. So long story short, they had a ton of these. Now, let's go and understand what all these mean. The problem with decoding temples is we know very little about the universe, we know very little about them, and we know very little about us. Like if I explain to a person that the sky above is your psyche, people are going to get shocked, but that's how it is. So what they knew, we are just discovering. So let's understand how they looked at things. Now, if you look at what is called cosmology of different civilizations, they depicted the entire Genesis and cosmology in a very different way. On the screen, you're probably seeing how the Norses explained how the structure of the universe is. And very naturally, when they draw these trees and mountains and all that, people get like perplexed. They take it literally. Like, what are they talking about? Asgard, Midgard, all that stuff. The point that I want to explain is that everything was built into a code for people to understand the structure of the universe. So that's point number one. Point number two is Vedic cosmology is extremely detailed. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a 2-minute video, which includes, it's going to include a very interesting segment of how the universe works. 2.5 minutes, very worthwhile.
Water, fire, air, ether, intelligence, and ego. As a coconut has its hard outer shell and inner liquid, so the universe has its outer coverings and an inner space half filled with ocean water. On that ocean, another Vishnu expansion reclined on a serpent bed while being massaged by his consort Lakshmi. From his navel arose a lotus on which Brahma was born. Initially, the universe was pitch dark and Brahma engaged in meditation. Then he was empowered to create the universe. This account of creation may appear fantastic to some, but modern scientific theories also require fantastic leaps of faith to explain the origin of the universe. Vedic cosmology explains that the universe is made up of 14 vertically arranged planetary systems, or lokas. Each system resembles a galaxy and comprises stars, planets, and other celestial bodies. The topmost planetary system is Satyaloka, the abode of Brahma, which is at a height of 1.87 billion miles above Earth. Below this Satyaloka planetary system is the Tapaloka planetary system, the abode of the ascetics, which is at a height of nearly 1 billion miles above the Earth. Here, the ascetics live in a solitary, serene environment conducive for yoga and meditation on transcendence. Their disciplined life of joyous austerity prepares them for returning back to the non-material world. As we move down from Tapaloka, we pass through Maharloka and Janaloka until we reach the Svargaloka planetary system, also known as heaven.
Then from the center of the dome, a chandelier, which shows the planets according to the Vedic version.
This planet is a star. It is rotating from east to west. It is hanging like a chandelier taking shelter of the pole star. That we can see everybody.
That the pole star or the North Star remains fixed and does not orbit in the sky is well known to astronomers and sailors alike. Less known is the fact that the pole star rotates powerfully on its own axis. The ancient Vedic text called Matsya Purana explains, the planets and stars are all attached to the pole star by invisible astral cords of wind called pravaha. The revolution of the pole star causes the orbital motion of other planets and stars. Through meditation, yogic astronomers visualize the planets and stars as different parts of the body of Shishumar, the transcendental dolphin. The pole star, the topmost of the heavenly planets, is like the capital of the middle universe. Here, the third form of Vishnu resides on an ocean of milk. In times of universal disturbances, the demigods headed by...
So, long story short, the Vedic cosmology is very complex, very detailed, but they knew their stuff so well. And the reason I say this is, I think we need to change our perspective, because quantum physics says this again and again and again, that we live in empty space. And the reason we live in empty space is not enough. They just went way ahead and explained how we are basically in a hologram. Now, when we say a hologram, what does it mean? But first, let me explain to you a little bit of clarification. This hologram is not Maya. Maya was never what is called the illusion. Maya was actually the ignorance of knowledge. And some of the ignorance of knowledge is that no civilization has ever said that we are all moving in a ball and planets are moving in space and all that stuff. It was a very different cosmology entirely. And the reason I have to say that we cannot ignore what they are saying is because they have proved it. So let's talk about the way they understood the hologram, which is, we live in a hologram. The soul basically takes an avatar, and then they experience the reality, which is holographic, which is the reason we have 99.99% open space. And that is how the soul experiences. So they were very clear of these again and again, that ultimately the universe is not how we think. There is no material reality. Rather, it is a very pixelated reality. Pixelated would mean something like this, that everything is like a digital yin-yang model, which we're going to talk about a little bit later. But if you take a look at how we understand there is a pixelation of reality, our brain can never comprehend why the color changes, why the Coca-Cola bottle or can suddenly from red becomes black, why the circles are moving on the right, or the cubes are moving on the left. None of them are moving. It is that our brain just hallucinates this reality, and that is why I say that we have to look at evidence and again, which is something that we have been ignoring. So one of the key elements that we want to understand is the tree. The tree was simply the explanation of the torus field. And if you look at the torus, for example, it resembles exactly the tree. They were all talking about magnetic fields, but they knew one thing very clearly, and that is we have a self, the soul experiences, it has its ego, it has its shadow, it has its personality. What happens is simply the cosmos pulses around the human self. And that's why every eclipse is a way forward and looking backward. We'll talk about that a little later. So this is how they looked at it. Everything is an electromagnetic field. The heart pulses and creates the magnetic field, and the meridians have electricity. That's why acupuncture is such a great medicine. Now, what they meant is that everything ultimately is a Mobius strip. And we can explain this in detail with evidence over here, which is undeniable. Now, what's a Mobius strip? It's like a surface where you have to go through 4 pi or 720 degrees to come back to the same position. So if you look at this, what I've done is I've taken Julius AI, I've taken all the orbital details of, say, Mars and Venus that you see over here on the right and model them out. If you take a look, I wish we could, go detailed into it. Perhaps that's a question we can ask later. But the point is very simple. The movement of Mars Venus, for example, is exactly like a Mobius strip. I went a little further. So what we did is we looked at Sun Moon. And as you look at the movement of the Sun Moon, and this is real data, mind it, for about 10 years, perfectly to the minute, it basically creates the Mobius strip. So ultimately, all these Mobius strips, if you look at it, it's like the yin-yang system.
Excellent. So, Bashish, I have a question to ask. Like,
Yeah.
just now you mentioned something about sun and moon, and coincidentally, we are also having a biggest eclipse of year this time, which is ongoing right now. Do you think there is any connection between that kind of astrology during making of our temples as well?
100%. And let me rather show, I think, how do I unshare? How you folks are seeing, are you folks seeing this one? What are you seeing over here? Are you seeing the 3D over here?
Yeah,
Okay.
like some kind of figure in green and blue.
Okay, perfect. So this is really taking all the 3D data and modeling it in Julius. We found out that this is the path of the sun and the path of the moon. The blue, as you see, is the sun's path, and the green is the moon's path. Now, what happens in eclipses is they basically come together. When they come together, if you take a look at this is basically nothing but Mobius strips in action. And this is like a torus. You can see how the energy is moving from inside and coming out outside. When eclipses happen, it basically means that the collective hologram is going to change. So, Kanchan, as I said, this is a very deep discussion, but I will go deeper into this in the slides as well. Like, what's the application really? Like, what are we supposed to really do? To understand this, we really need to understand what is called, what are you folks seeing, by the way? Let me see. Okay, looks like
It's a forest now.
it's a forest now. Okay, let me see
Yeah.
what happened. I I'm so not sure about WebEx, so let me see. Did I? Oh, let me. Okay. How about now? What are you folks seeing?
Yin Yang?
Perfect. So let's carry on. I think something happened with Keynote. So the yin yang ultimately becomes like the digital field of 1 and zeros of the hologram. Now, why I say that is because you can see when you do the calculations, the whole thing is really like this. The whole thing spins from the top, which is the yin yang, but reality is that in 3D, it is the same Mobius strip in action. So the entire yin yang, if you look at this, is like a digital experience that our soul is having for the entire reality. Now, is that a concept? Well, not really. Look at the Freemasons, for example. On the picture on the right, you can see the sun and the moon. Now, there are pillars because a standing wave, which we'll talk about later, is like a stable wave that repeats, which is sun and moon, which is like a sine curve. You can see they're standing on the black and white, that's the yin yang, the digital reality. Then on the other hand, we also see the yin yang ultimately becomes our genetic code. So genetic code would mean that if you look at the temples, and I've covered this in part 2 and part 1, our entire genetic code is basically in the mandalas. So these people knew our genetic code as well thousands of years back. The proof is that if you take a DNA spiral and find out where they all meet, the 32 vertices are basically these pillars in the temple, and the entire code of how to modify our DNA is actually on the steps, which is there are 3 stop codons and there are start codons. So the point is, they all knew this science really well, which is implosive physics, electromagnetic theory, and finally, the torus field structure. That's why they used an entirely different model. So what we did is we took this model, this entire data. So which is we took the yin yang and how is the yin yang going to repeat? And we modeled it in mathematics. And what we found was game changing, because when you take this infinity-like figure and look at it from a surface, this is what the yin yang actually stands for. And again, this is no BS. This is like real data, real evidence. So we can even cover that later. But as I was saying, the DNA acts like a fractal antenna, getting the energies of the sun, moon, and the planets and the stars. And the proof, you can see the proof right here. And this is proven that the DNA, the 4 elements, the 4 chemicals or enzymes, or whatever you might say of the molecules, they actually orient themselves into a cube, and it acts like a fractal antenna. So let's go back and kind of revisit this a little bit. Like, why were the temples, what were they doing? So we're going to apply this to the Kailash temple for a moment. So let's take a kind of a deep dive. So first of all, when you look at the Kailash temple, this is so dense. They put the entire astronomical code over here, but why the astronomical code? Well, because they knew that the hologram is basically built with electromagnetic fields. And all these fields, they map onto each other. And these fields ultimately show us what we need to do to experience our inside, that is the psyche, and the world outside. So when we look at pictures like this with the Natraj, they have a lot of geometry, but the geometry is way bigger, right? The geometry is that they put Orion, which is Shiva, and the movement of the hands and legs basically shows how the energy moves in the stars, which is how the electromagnetic waves actually move in this hologram, and creates the reality. So everything ultimately became a code. You can't imagine a pose like this, right? It's impossible for any human to do it. That is because they had mapped the universe, how the energy flows, to understand how this total energy moves. The rest of it was all code. So what they did is they built these structures, they built the mythology, they encoded all these details of the movement, and then they created what is called, certain pictures like bows and arrows. These are like objective symbols, which basically had a subjective meaning. So how do you interpret, for example, Kailash Temple? So we talked about Orion over here, and if you look closely at the picture at the bottom, you'll see there is another constellation called Lepus, which is on Shiva or, Nataraja's feet over there. So it is saying that the energy from the pole star actually comes from the top, and then the energy basically starts moving. That is exactly how these mythologies basically originated. Okay, I don't know if you can hear the noise behind me. There's a little bit of a fire truck, but I think it's gone. Let's go back and talk about one of the big purposes of the Kailash Temple. The Kailash Temple was ginormous, but it focused mainly on a star called Regulus. Why Regulus? Which I'm going to explain to you as simply as possible. But this star is everywhere and in India as well. But first, let's understand what people understood about this star. So many people depicted this star based on the sickle, the question mark. For example, the inverted question mark or the polarized question mark. It was called the sickle. Now, this does not make sense until you look at some of these pictures of Regulus. For example, if you look at China, well, you see the star, that's Regulus. That's actually Sirius. Then the hammer is called the Thor's hammer, which is Jupiter. And then the sickle was the lion. So you can exactly understand what it is. Now, you just have to combine these energies. All flags you can see is based on these stars and crescents. The crescent was not the moon. The crescent was simply Regulus. You can obviously see the monarchy that has gone everywhere and destroyed countries and civilizations sitting on their throne, and at the bottom you can see Regulus as well. What does it mean? Well, here's the meaning of Regulus. From Regulus we get the word regal, regalia, royal, king, regulation, and of course, ruler. Now the point is, what is the reason they were looking at the star Regulus in the hologram? The reason is Regulus gives power. So if somebody knows when Regulus is going to be connecting with the sun, moon, and stars and all that stuff, that person with that knowledge becomes extremely powerful. That's why every leader who has been powerful always has a certain Regulus characteristic. But Regulus, on the other hand, can make a person go extremely up, and then it can also bring somebody extremely down. But now, where do you see Regulus? Here it is in India. So you can see the whole civilization of the Ashok Stamba, or the entire power structure of Ashoka, was built on what? Regulus. What happened to Ashoka? An entire demise. People used Regulus to show over here where the star would be coming down and putting its energies. That's why they created what is called the Stamba, which is the fixed point where the star shines and puts its energies. You can see many of them here, even the coins. And then finally, you also see it in movies. Let me show you two of them. Take a look at this. This is Lionsgate. So this is Lionsgate. They knew very well that the whole Regulus thing was very important. And if you can build something based on the movement of Regulus, well, you're going to shine. Lionsgate, on the other hand, did extremely well, and now they are filing for bankruptcy. This is what happens with Regulus, and that's why power structures change. Let's look at the second one. And you will see the same thing with Lionsgate, but this time there's a horse in the picture. So the point is, what do they know? We don't. Because each and every film that they made was always shown when Regulus energy was high. So they have been using these energies really well. Let's go back to Regulus. Now what we have, this is basically the side view, and this is the top view. So what I did is I took this particular plan, not the plan, sorry, the side view, and I drew exact angles to Regulus in the sky. So this is one line, and this is the other line at exact degrees. When you map them, it is exact mapping of Regulus. So these people knew what they were doing, how they mapped the stars and all that. So what we want to do is let's decode what they were doing. Now this requires a little bit of advanced math and science. I'll try to make this easy, but let's take a quick look. The first thing is we need to understand what is called a Fourier transform. Fourier transform means that you can take a wave, like I can map Regulus's position over thousands of years, take that data, and then give it to Julius AI to basically form what are the rhythms that it has. So what's a Fourier transform? Fourier transform is simply like you're listening to an orchestra. If you apply Fourier transform to it, you'll be able to synthesize each and every vibration, each and every instrument within that sequence. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. So what I found out is if you apply a fast Fourier transform into the positions of Regulus, you can see the curve that is on the right. Now, this is like a Boyle's law curve. Boyle's law curve would mean like, it is a hyperbolic curve, but the hyperbolic curve is what it does is that in a very short amount of time, it gives a tremendous amount of energy, amount of energy, and then it flattens out. And you'll see the application in stock markets with this. Then you can take this and model this on the left bottom. You can find out the entire quadratic equation, so you can monitor how Regulus is moving in the sky. This is how we have this cubic and the quadratic and all the algebraic pieces, because the movement of the stars was the reason they had to develop these equations. Now, Regulus means that it gives tremendous amount of success to an individual, or tremendous amount of huge successful inflationary energies. So which means people said it has to have the energies of Mars, which is action, and Jupiter, which is expansion. Remember, Jupiter expands anything. Like inflation happens because of Jupiter. So what I did is I took the 3D orbits of Regulus and I said, okay, can we check if Mars and Jupiter really come close to Regulus? Because think of Regulus as a transmitter of a standing wave energy. It pulses. And then Jupiter and Mars, which are moving, they take that energy and they move it across. I found out that it is exactly so. And this is exactly the reason the entire energies were transmitted into mythology of Gilgamesh and Prahlad, which is suddenly breaking a pillar, which is a standing wave. The lion comes out and breaking out a king. So the question is, we are dealing with lions. How do we know it was all about lions in, in the Kailash temple? Well, the lions are right here. You can see that the lions are now remember that there are two sets of lions. If you look closely, we'll talk about that in a little bit. But what happens is you can see they are arranged in cardinal directions, which means 90 degrees to each other. Now 90 degrees means they're cardinal, which means this energy has a looping system. They are on three petals, petal-like structures. What are these petal-like structures? We'll talk about it as well, and you'll understand how to decode this. So let's take a closer view. You can see there are two lion-like structures. So that's Leo major and Leo minor. Take a look at this one now. Let's zoom in. This is one structure of Regulus and the other, which is the constellation of Leo over here. Now you can take a look how these energies are looking at each other. Now, take a look at this one, which is, if they are looking at each other, what's the significance of these petals?
हाथ में हेयर बैंड है ना दिख रहा है कहीं
Kanchan, I think you're not on mute. So the point is, over here, there are 8 phases, or 8 over here, which means it makes it 32. They basically built it like a gear system. So when you have gears, for example, over here, all these act like gears of the sun and the moon. What happens after that? This is exactly which I was talking about, which is these are magnetic fields of the sun moon coming together and then releasing this energy, massive energy, into the hologram, which creates the holographic reality. Now, is this real? Now, what I did is I took the data and then I said, okay, if this is such a huge amount of energy, first of all, does the sun and the moon, they come together in an eclipse point on Regulus? And the answer is yes. We saw it. And the result is that when the sun moon come together and they meet on Regulus, a massive amount of energy is discharged. There's a huge rise and there is a huge fall, which is exactly what happens during eclipses. How do we know that? Well, evidence is everything. You remember what happened when the last time the sun, moon, Regulus, they all came together. It was during the dot-com time. What happened during dot-com? Huge energy went up and up and up. And just when the eclipse happened on March 10th, boom, everything went down. So all these kings, rulers, monarchies, and all those people, they understand why Regulus is important, because they understand this system. Once we understand this system, we will be able to understand why the Lion's Gate and all these stuff are fundamental. So I went a lot fast, but I hope I completed this right on time. Over to you, Kanchan.
Just one question, Subhashish. It's like you explained very beautifully about connection of sun and moon in the structure of temples we had. And while attending your presentation, it was very clear, like you use certain terms like Leo, Taurus, and all. So somewhat it's a part of astrology as well. So maybe we can cover somewhat like, how astrology and construction of temples are connected, or, what is the connection between astrology and temples, and decode it in our next session.
Absolutely. In fact, today being an eclipse,
Yeah.
if we can just explain to them that astrology is, you can't look at how astrology works from all the pundits over there, although there is definitely some sense, but there is a need to bring in how the ancients looked at astrology. Now, I'll give a quick example that we need to go into the physics of astrology rather than the archetypes of astrology. So, for example, what you can see is I took all the Venus data and then modeled this in Julius. This is how it looks like. This is how Venus looks in the sky. And it creates this beautiful pentagram kind of structure. Now, when Venus basically goes, now very near to, let's say, what I've done is, for example, this is the next phase of physics-based astrology, which is whenever Venus comes in, you can measure these dates, big events happen in relationships. Now, the point is, we have been only talking about archetypal stuff. You do Saturn and you do this and you're going to get this. That's not evolution. That's being a pundit telling you how what's going to happen to you. No, there is a free will piece of it. Why you should do it. What is the field telling you over here? This is the next level of AI model that I've been building. And very interestingly, the whole thing can be applied to business more than a human. So whenever a merger and acquisition comes into place, I can just look up the energy systems of a business. I can look at energy systems of people to find out what you need to do in eclipses. I'll give a very interesting example with me itself. So
Is
this
it
is
something
my
like matchmaking which we do in India before marriage? Like going through astrology chart of two people and
exactly.
see how compatible they are.
But I think that we need to take this way further and bring the physics component, because
Mm-hmm.
timing is not what happens. How do you simulate a person's life moving forward? So, example, right? So, this is my chart. And as you can see, at this moment of time, it is, what time is it? Like, have we crossed 12 o'clock? Near, not really 12 o'clock. The eclipse is just about to happen. So if this eclipse is just about to happen, I just don't know how to mark on the screen. But if you see the moon, my Neptune, the sun, and this energy, it's creating it's like creating a square. A square means you have the highest amount of entropy. So how do you interpret this system? Because the whole thing is an energy system. Over here, the moon and the sun, they are facing each other. You have to face each other. Sun is your ego, moon is your emotions. So now you've got to really look at yourself and find out, what are you feeling? It's all about feelings. Now, between the feelings is going to come this energy of Neptune. Neptune gives vision. But what happens that we only look at the positive side of these energies? I can dream about making this quantum physics one of the best things in the world. Now I have megalomania. So that energy also comes from Neptune. So you've got to continuously look at the sun-moon system within you and find out, how do you act in the world. So next session, we should actually use the physics and the astrological systems in temples to show how this can be brought into business, like what's happening with Apple, what's happening with OpenAI, when can an acquisition be made, can you do house hunting. I'll give a small example and we will end this session. It's in a very simple way. For example, people do house hunting, for example. I want to show you about a house that I recently looked at. So it is at 133 Loon Hill Road. I think it was Loon Hill Road. So let's take a look at the property for a moment. I fell in love with this property. Oops, let me just show you. You're going to fall in love with this property too once I show this to you. Oops. Anyway, maybe I'm having a little bit of a hard time 1 second. Let's try one last time. Because if we succeed, we might be able to take a look at it. Oh, maybe this house is already bought. Let's give it one last try. If not, okay. Anyway, whatever. I loved this particular property. Okay, so then I realized, what I did is any deed of a house, for example, let's bring this house energy in. So when you buy a house, there is a deed, right? You can actually bring this deed on top of your own astro chart. Now, if you look at this, I was feeling like I have to buy this property. And then I realized that the house, the Pluto, which is Shiva, which is the deep desire, connects with my Venus, my relationship. Now, these are energy systems. Once you understand these energy systems can be applied to a home, to your life, to a marriage, to a business, to an M&A and all that. And I think we should bring this wisdom, which is inside these temples, to make a difference in how we live. So I think that is going to be the future of doing business, understanding and being aligned with the world. And I think that's basically what is my idea of bringing a unique knowledge of decoding temples into business and our civilization. So over to you, Kanchan.
I would see
One
your
question.
next name coming up as Baba Subhashish. Like, the last conversation we had, it's exactly like, everyone, like, especially people like me, those who are very curious to know whether this thing is going to work out for me, or, what are the chances for me to get succeed, or like, they have their all their charts checked up and like figuring out how well this thing is going to be, whether be it a very tiny thing in the life. And if I'm going to get my answers through AI and using this method, definitely it's going to be a huge, huge revolution. So I can say I can forecast, or I can foresee you as a upcoming, AI Baba kind of a person.
Hey, hi, Baba. I think that's a very
One,
good name. And
one
oh my
question.
God. Let's-
One last question is, can I ask now?
yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, so you talked about DNA. So the ancients knew about DNA. How did they knew it versus what we know or what we have developed now?
Yes. So that is such a interesting question because they knew about the DNA because in a hologram, remember I told you that we are souls having a holographic experience. So remember, we go back to quantum physics. Quantum physics says 99.99% of objective reality is open space. Some people say 97%, 99%. Who the hell cares? It is empty space, period. So which means if you're holding a ball in your hand, like this is say the neutron proton, the next electron is going to be moving 20 kilometers away. That is the level of empty space in our body. So we are avatars. The soul has taken this experience in this body, and the body belongs to the hologram. So anything the hologram has, which is the sun, planets, etc., has the same model in the avatar as well. Now, why they knew it? Because it's the same science. That's why these people built temples, because the temple integrated the human, the microcosm, and the universe, the macrocosm, together. It sounds bizarre, but every temple is built on the precision of the human body. Everything is about the DNA and how the DNA of the human connects with the stars and planets and all that stuff. So basically, long story short, if you read a book called The Cosmos and Psyche, it's by a very phenomenal physicist and mythologist. I think he's a Harvard guy as well. His name is Richard Tarnas. Richard Tarnas explains that the sky is our psyche. So the cosmos is our psyche, the psyche is our cosmos, which means the universe is actually measuring what we are feeling, what we are experiencing. So we are nothing but experiments of the universe. And we are going through this experience, going through the emotions, and the universe is just learning. So, just to conclude on this question, the best would be to look at a guy called Thomas Campbell. He has written a very beautiful book. Don't go through the book, don't buy it. There's plenty of free material on YouTube. He has explained every theory of the planet by bringing in all these elements, not with temples, but with holography and all that. And he's a nuclear physicist. So he doesn't talk BS. He has brought all of these together and explained that what is the only thing humans should be doing when you face tough circumstances. The whole thing is called entropy. When you're going through crazy times, evolutionary times, then you have chaos, disorder. That is entropy. And when you are falling in love, feeling peace, your entire DNA, your entire psyche is in entire peace. What is that? Lowest entropy. So for example, we don't know what the word love means. For somebody likes to eat chicken, man. So you're killing chickens for love, right? You fall in love. Now, is the love of a child the same as the love with a husband or a wife? No, they are entirely different. We don't know what the word love means. Our English language is terrible. But if you talk in physics and the physics of the DNA, they would say love means the lowest entropy of how you're functioning with the universe. That's what love is. So I think we got to change our entire model and our language because we don't know what is love. We don't know what is happiness. We don't know how to explain many of these things that the ancient civilizations did, which is physics. And that's why they studied the DNA, because the DNA had to find the lowest entropy with the universe.
Wow.
Long-winded answer, but just give you a detailed answer on this one.
Oh, but wonderful session.
Thank you very much. And we will catch up next time with the next phase, which is
I
how do
think
you
I
bring...
I have
Yeah.
ample of questions for our next session. Actually, we'll connect offline and talk about so many questions which are just like, popping in my head after going through whatever you said right now.
Yeah, I think we got to bring this ancient temple knowledge and the physics to our
Part 4.
lives so we can bring it. And,
Absolutely.
and I think the AI models are worthwhile because the AI model does the computation. It will even explain what it is. Then we can take decisions that should we really do it? Should we not? Then it can simulate a future forward and you decide what you want to do. I think alignment is what we need in our lives.
Right.
So should conclude, right?
Over to you, Chandan.
Okay. Thank you, Subhashish and Kanchan, for the wonderful session. It was a session full of information and Vedic knowledge. Thank you all for encouragement and participation. It has been pleasure bringing these Harvard Hindu alumni sessions to you. As we come to an end of this session, we are going to stop the recording. Thank you and have rest of the nice day.
Take care, everybody. Bye.
Bye-bye.